Deasy, and this is lesson 2 of the Colored Gemstone Academy, and it is all about the history of gemstones. And not just how old are gemstones and where do they come from, but this lesson is going to deal with what is the science of gemology and how do we get there today. And we're going to start by talking about how old these gemstones are. Now, this is a sensitive subject for me, as I just turned 60 on February 15th of this year, 2020. But I feel very young compared to my competition. Right here, the history of gemstones. Diamonds are estimated to be 1 to 35 billion years old. It's probably among the oldest gem substances on Earth. Of course, in order for a diamond to form, it's usually in volcanic activity in these pipes, these lava pipes, with tremendous heat and pressure that takes pure carbon and creates the beautiful diamond that you see on your finger. So that's diamonds, 1 to 35 billion years old. Then amber, that beautiful amber colored stone that comes from both the Dominican Republic and over in what is the Czech Republic, what the Czechoslovakia used to be, and the sea that is over there. Estimated to be 35 to 70 million years old. And of course, that was also explained or stylized in the movie Jurassic Park, the original movie Jurassic Park, where they showed how whatever happened when that tree sap fossilized was a moment in time, and the DNA in that bug or leaf is still intact after 35 to 70 million years. Then we get into some of the more modern stones, relatively speaking. Lapis, which comes from Afghanistan and a couple of other places on Earth, dates back in terms of actually gathering and collecting it to the Neolithic age, which is between 12,000 and 3,500 BC. So a lot of the lapis that you see today was probably originally mined or gathered. We're talking about 3,500 BC at the youngest. So that's still 5,500 years ago. And then one of my favorite gemstones, and I've traveled to many of these turquoise mines all over the United States, was mined from 3000 BC, perhaps earlier. And the earliest mines probably, although probably there was some activity in the United States, when you think about over in the Middle East, in what is now known as Iran, which was the Persian Empire, they probably did quite a bit of the mining back at that time. So that gives you an idea of how old a lot of these gemstones are. So we'll turn the page, and this is very appropriately me, old school. And the reason I'm starting with old school is that a lot of people think, well, where did the science come from? And we think of it as relatively recent, like in the GIA, for example, was established, I want to say it was around 1931, something like that. But old school, I call this, because back at the time of the Roman Empire, there was a gentleman by the name of Pliny the Elder. And he was relevant, or actually lived between AD 337 and AD 79. So that gives us what, 42 years of age there or abouts. He was a noted author, a lawyer, and a naval commander. He was a busy guy, but he did write a lot of books, and he was noted for a 37-volume of works called Natural History. So he was obviously a Renaissance man, the author, lawyer, naval commander, and he wrote all these books on the world around him, plant life, animals, all of those kind of things. And his 33rd book in the series of 37 was dedicated to metallurgy. And metallurgy was very interesting because even back then, almost 2,000 years ago, he was talking about the properties of gold and how malleable it is and how heavy it was and how dense it was. He also talked about mercury in his metallurgy book, and how toxic it was for human beings to be around it or to consume it. And then the last 2 books that he wrote, and I like to say he saved the very best for last, was dedicated to mineralogy. And there were really a lot of advanced concepts that he talked about. For example, in that volume, he talked about how diamond dust is used to etch and fashion and polish other gemstones. He also, well in advance of the Mohs scale of hardness, which was developed in 1812 by Frederick Mohs, he had a scratch test that he talked about, and how some gems were harder than others, and that diamond was the hardest gemstone on Earth. And of course, that was still true until a discovery recently, but diamonds were harder than any other gem. But the other thing that really fascinated me about this, because as long as we have had gemstones or have been aware of gemstones, people have been trying to imitate them or sell them as something that they aren't. So that's not a modern invention either. He talked about fraud and forgery in his book, his 2-volume book, 37 to 38, in mineralogy. So it's very interesting, and it's obviously, in order to know, how we got to be where we are today, it's pretty important to understand, who were the trailblazers that got us there. So now that brings us up to the modern day. In the modern day, there was an organization in London called the National Association of Goldsmiths, and they obviously, gold and silver and precious metals were known for quite some time, for many, many, many centuries. But then they began to offer a course, a study in gemology, in 1908. By the way, this is not a misprint. I know my writing is horrible, but they spelled it with 2 M's. We here in the United States say gemology with 1 M. They called it 2 gems, gemology. And in 1908, they offered the first course in gemology. And then they changed their name, or at least they split off to the Gemological Association of Great Britain. And so they were this educational opportunities through the Gemological Association of Great Britain. And they offered their first diploma in 1913. So we're getting into really modern times. We're just a little over 100 years since they offered the first diploma. Now, another important name that you might want to learn is Robert M. Shipley. Now, Robert M. Shipley was an American man, and he went over to take the course from the Gemological Association of Great Britain, and he received his diploma in 1928. And he brought that knowledge back here to the United States, and he founded the Gemological Institute of America, we call it the GIA, in 1931. So just 3 years after he got his diploma, he started his own shop. And today, the Gemological Institute of America has grown to be known as the world's foremost authority in colored gemstones. The other thing that's important, and I mentioned this, I think, in the first class. I don't remember what I had for dinner yesterday, Lila, when I said in the first class. But I talked about how you can take courses with the Gemological Institute of America. You don't have to be a jeweler or a jewelry store owner to take a class. And my degree is in something called an accredited jewelry professional, and they offer those courses online. They call it distance education. So if you go to GIA. I don't know if it's edu or .org. I think it's .edu. You can sign up for classes. Their Colored Gemstone course, which we're going to cover a lot of that information here, is $250. But you can actually become an accredited jewelry professional if that's something that you feel is important to you. Now, that's the last of our setup classes. And I know the first 2 were pretty brief, but then we're going to get into the meat and potatoes next week, when my hair will be a little bit shorter because I'm getting my hair cut tomorrow. But we're going to offer the bones of the Colored Gemstone course, and it's going to start off with what 3 traits do all gemstones have. Now remember also, after each class, I want to have a little fun, so it's not all learning and dreary. And I'm going to give you the unique opportunity to meet a gemstone that many of you may not have heard of, called Prystine, which is a white magnesite that is mined out of Nevada. And it looks like this in the rough, almost like cauliflower, right? But look how this baby polishes up. Well, I also told you how important it was to, whether you get a degree in a graduate gemology or not, to visit a mine. So at the end of this lesson, which we're ending right now, stay tuned, because I'm going to show you some footage of the Prystine mine in Nevada that Judy and I filmed, and you'll get to travel and see what we go through to go to mine. I hope you had fun. If you do like what you're seeing, remember at the bottom of your screen in that red box it says subscribe. Please click on that. That helps me out. And also the little bell at the top of the screen, if you click on that, you will know when each of these new gem classes are going to be available. That's all for today. I hope we see you next week when I'll be shorter hair. Thank you so much for joining us today. All right, here we go, and I hope you enjoyed lesson 2 of the Colored Gemstone Academy on my YouTube channel, Deasy Gemstones. At the end of each lesson, I want to kind of introduce you to a gem that maybe you know or would like to get to know better, or maybe one you've never heard of before. Last week, of course, we talked about the amethyst and where you find these geodes and how do you get from that to something that looks like that. Yeah, see, there's a faceted amethyst in there. Well, this time I'm going to introduce you to a stone, a gemstone, that perhaps some of you have never heard of before or never even seen in person. And Judy Kroll, my wife, and I discovered this incredible gemstone about, I want to say 4 or 5, maybe 6 years ago. And there's a guy that we get a lot of gems from the Southwest United States and Mexico. And he showed us something that looked an awful lot like cauliflower, like that. And I'm like, okay. Then he showed me how it finishes up. That is a beautiful and shiny stone. And the best part about it, it is completely natural and untreated. Now, it's not the hardest of gemstones, but in a nice opaque like this, it'll wear beautifully for probably the rest of your life. Now, many of you probably never get an opportunity to visit an actual gem mine. So through the magic of this YouTube channel, we're going to show you how we got there, what we did. And you know, I always talk about this in mining. It is in some of the most desolate, hard to reach places on planet Earth. And if you look at the video right now, you're going to see a pickup truck. I'm just shooting out of the front of the pickup truck, and we're going slowly up a very, very steep mountain with a lot of rocks and debris in the way. And one of the things that you won't see, because this is just a short clip that I just showed, is that what happens when you get to some of these places is it gets so narrow and so obstructed that you can't even turn around. So you might have to end up going in reverse and hoping you don't roll the truck off of a cliff for a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, 5 miles, something like that. So a lot of times, even though we took the truck up there to show you what that was like, a lot of times he will leave the truck closer to the highway, and he pulls a little like 4-wheel vehicle, a small one that has a trailer on it, and then collect all of the rough that way. But I wanted to tell you, it was such an amazing adventure because we were in Las Vegas and we drove with him about 3 to 4 hours outside, and we got into a national forest and we started to climb. And as we get up there and as we got closer and closer, and you'd even see this dirt road, kind of a lot of, you know, yellow or reddish dirt or sand. And every once in a while you start to see in these little kind of crossings some white showing through that. And what that's attributed to, we were nowhere near where the actual source was, but whenever even in deserts, they have a rainy season, and the rain starts to wash down some of this white magnesite in these little grooves, these little rivers that form. And that's why you see a little bit of white littered all over the place. It was actually amazing because when we stopped about halfway, I was looking at the red dirt and I saw this just flash of beautiful white. And I thought, well, this is disgusting. Here we're in a national forest, somebody left some litter there. So I went to go look at the litter, and actually, no, it was a piece of beautiful, pure, pristine white magnesite. So then when we finally got there, it was amazing. It just, we rounded a curve and it just opened up, and you see just a mountain of white rock just sitting there waiting to be taken. So it's really an amazing gemstone. How it got the name, Judy and I always just assumed that it was because it was so pristine and white. But a lot of times miners come up with these names, and Frank was theorizing that it was off of a farm that was called Preston's Farm, which became a Preston Road, and there they called it the Preston Mine, and maybe that got, you know, changed into Prystine. But I love the name Prystine because it really is a great descriptor of what it is. So now I want you just to enjoy, with a little bit of music background, a 2-minute video that Judy Crowell, my wife, put together of our time in inviting you in the Prystine mine. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you all next week for lesson 3 of the Colored Gemstone Academy. Thanks for watching.